It's been a great summer, hasn't it? Some of you have been tracking with us all summer long. We started in the middle of May on this BC series. The whole idea is, what about this part of the Bible that leads us up to Christ, the before Christ part of the Bible? A lot of times we call it the Old Testament. So many of you are brand new since the summer began, and you've kind of jumped in our journey along the way. I'm, of course, exceedingly glad that you're here, and I hope that your experience at our church is one where you are encountering God and where whatever step of faith you need to take, you're figuring out how to take that in the community here. I'm going to take just a minute because we're kind of crossing the halfway mark of BC tonight to catch you up just a little bit. So let me take just 1 minute to do this. So far in BC, we've talked about a couple of things. We started with dependence and then deliverance. That was the first two sections of the Old Testament. We're going to finish deliverance tonight. Dependence was all about trusting God. And it was all about God reaching down to reestablish relationship with us after the trust was broken. God answers the question for us. Will He provide? Yes. Does He have a plan? Yes. This is about a trust relationship with God. And then we've seen how God has brought His people to deliverance. Deliverance that was painful and it was messy, but it was worth it. And actually it's incomplete, which is how most of the deliverance in our real life works. That we do make it somewhere, but we don't make it all the way. God stays with us. And so tonight we'll finish our part of the story where they're still in the wilderness. We've, of course, been saying that throughout the whole story of the Scriptures, there's this common theme. This is the dynamic of life with God. It's about relationship with God, and it's about responsibility. And for a long time, I would run into people who knew all about the responsibility part, but didn't know about the relationship part. They would know all the things God wanted them to do, all the commands they were supposed to follow, all the stuff that God wanted everyone to do, but they missed out that God was their Father. And I always thought, that's tragic. It's actually toxic. That's how I'd say it, to think of God in any way other than relational. But I got to tell you more and more. I run into people who think highly of God relationally, but almost completely dismiss the responsibility part. I mean, it's as if they picture God, that God's main interest for your life or their lives is that He essentially wants you to build a selfish life. Of course, nobody calls it that. Nobody calls it selfish. What they actually say is that God just wants me to be happy. That's the phrase we use. And then we expect God to make our lives in some sort of moment-by-moment, continuous happiness. And I think that is not the God of the Scriptures. It's not who God is. His main goal for your life is not moment-by-moment continuous happiness. It is not. Actually, His goal for your life is that you would take the responsibility to construct your own life in a way that honors Him and the relationship that you have with Him, and also brings about restoring this broken world. That's God's plan for your life. And it is this rhythm of relationship and responsibility all the way through. And so we're going to pick up the story today where we left off last week. You remember 2 weeks ago we talked about the deliverance out of Egypt, the crossing of the Red Sea. It was miraculous. Last week, Dan led us in a message. It was awesome. I listened to it this week about the 10 Commandments. Now, just from a timeline standpoint, so you can capture this, we couldn't quite figure out how to do the wilderness and the 10 Commandments in perfect chronological order because the 10 Commandments come in the middle of the wilderness. And so there's a little bit of tonight's message that leads up to that and then leads from that as we go. But let's just begin with this question. What should we learn in the wilderness? What should we learn in the wilderness? The nation of Israel, the people of God, are going to learn quite a lot tonight. And I don't know about you, but my guess is that you may very well feel like you're in one of the wilderness seasons of life. What is the wilderness even? Well, look at this verse with me. This is God's promise in Exodus 3:17. He says, "And I have promised you to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt and into the land." It seems so simple when it's all in one verse, doesn't it? I'm going to bring you out of something and I'm going to bring you into something. And I got to tell you, the way I read this verse, it seems like, and on one step you'll be walking out and on the next step you're in. It's like I'm going to bring you out of the worship space into the commons area, and it's just like that. But the story that we find out tonight is that it's not just like that. This isn't just walking out of one thing and immediately being into the next thing. What happens in between coming up out of Egypt and going into the promised land is a 40-year period in Israel's life. And I don't know about you, but all the times in my life, including right now, there are certain things going on where I feel like, God, you have brought me out of something, but you haven't taken me yet into the next thing. And it causes me to be in a place where I feel like I'm in the wilderness, like I'm in a waiting season, like I'm in the in-between time. Like in this story, it's in the meantime. And you kind of think, like, God, I'm pretty sure that last season was finished, so what about the next season? Why aren't we there yet? You could be going out of a relationship into a relationship. You think you're done with the job you have, but the next job hasn't come yet. You want to move from where you are to where you're going to be. These things happen in our lives all the time. We call them waiting seasons. Tonight I'm going to call them wilderness. Just help me out here for a moment. Show of hands. Can any of you think of anything going on in your life right now where you feel like, you know what, that's me right now? I could say, I'm waiting. Well, tonight's message is for you. And so we're going to learn some of these lessons of the wilderness. Here's the first lesson. Where we're going is secondary to who we are becoming. Where we are going is always secondary to God, to who we are becoming. Now, none of us like this. Can we just acknowledge that from the beginning? We are much more interested in the destination than the development process that God wants to do in us while we're on our way to the destination. We just want to get there right now. And I need you to kind of see how this works, how important this is. I pulled this from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 1, verse 2, just to kind of give you a picture of how this is going to work. Within the first year or two of coming out of Egypt, the nation of Israel went down to Mount Sinai. That's where they were given the 10 Commandments. And then when they're at Mount Sinai, they have to take their journey from there. And here's how this is described. It takes 11 days to go from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by the Mount Seir road. Now, the scripture writer is just cluing us in here. He's saying anyone could do this. From where they are, Mount Horeb, that's also Mount Sinai, to Kadesh Barnea, which is kind of on the edge of the promised land. It's an 11-day trip. And it takes the nation of Israel about 38 or 39 more years to get there. What's the lesson here? I'm going to tell you what the lesson is here, and you'll want to laugh, but I'm totally serious. Here's the lesson. God is not in a hurry. God is not in a hurry. There is a work that He wants to do in you. God does some of His best work in the wilderness. And while you and I are so focused on the future and on what's next, God is not in a hurry. I like to take driving vacations. Our little Honda Odyssey that has 215,000 miles on it right now. I mean, we've been on the family trip to New York and back, Washington, D.C., and back, Savannah, Georgia, and back, Florida, and back, Hot Springs, Arkansas, and back, Dallas, and back, Utah, Yellowstone National Park. It's been all over the country. And when my kids were younger, and to some degree still now that they're older, there's always one question that comes on all these driving trips from the back seat, right? Now, it's been mitigated slightly by iPods, but only slightly. And the question is what? Are we there yet, right? And those of us who are parents, we just can't wait for our kids to grow up, to mature a little bit, to gain a little bit more patience, and to get to that spot in their life where they're not constantly chirping, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? But one of the things we understand is that while that's the road trip motif for children, it is actually the life motif for you and for me. We may not do it on the road trips anymore. We just do it in life. God, are we there yet? God, new job, I'm waiting. God, you wanted me to get married, right? God, you don't want me to live in this place forever, do you? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And with the same immaturity that children have in wondering, how can't we just be there? We all, in our wilderness seasons, want to get to the destination and avoid the development. I wanted to take this back to the very beginning of the journey. So the nation of Israel had just crossed through the Red Sea, and here's what we get. For 3 days, they traveled in the desert without finding water. 3 days. Now, they don't have water, so that's a big deal. But God had just delivered them with 10 plagues. He had just parted the Red Sea. He had just annihilated the most powerful country on planet Earth in their defense. 3 days they've been in the back seat, and here they are whining. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That's why they called the place Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" Now this grumbling theme is going to continue. It's a little different than the groaning theme that happened when they were in slavery. This is more grumbling with one another and certainly against their leaders. And this grumbling, get this, 19 times in the scriptures, there's a reference to the grumbling of the nation of Israel while they're in this wandering period. God actually performs a miracle here. He has Moses throw a piece of wood into this water. It makes it drinkable water, and you'd think, all right, finally, they're going to trust God. Let's just move forward one chapter later. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt." Goes on. "There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." These people were drama kings and drama queens. Oh, God, we should just die here, right? And then here's what happens, right? They're thinking back to that time that they had in Egypt. Do you remember what their occupation was in Egypt? They were slaves. Were they sitting around pots of fondue, eating, like, is this like meat everywhere? No, it wasn't. It wasn't. But this is actually what the wilderness does to people. It actually causes you to distort your previous circumstances, to exaggerate your current pain, and to lose perspective about where you are right now. And again, God provided for them. This is actually the second lesson from wilderness school, that God provides day by day. Now, in response to these people being hungry, and of course they were in the desert, we experience one of the greatest miracles of God in all of the scriptures. He promises them that he will provide for them sustenance every single day. We call it manna. And so they woke up one day, and this is how the story goes. When the dew was gone, thin flakes of frost. Like, I can't read that without, like, Tony the Tiger kind of jumping into my mind. But anyway, thin flakes of frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" Now, this is kind of interesting. You won't catch this from the text. If you read another section, you will. This is actually what they called it. They didn't call it manna. They called it, "What is it?" That was their name, or like the street version, "What it is." Right? That's just what they named it. For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need." And in God's provision for them, each day when they would wake up, there was what they needed. Don't miss that. Every single day, when they would wake up for that day, they had what they needed for that day. Now, everyone's a little tempted in situations like this to think, well, the manna showed up today, but what if it doesn't show up tomorrow? I'm going to take things into my own hands in case God isn't actually going to provide for me day by day. And so this is how the story goes. Then Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it until morning." However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. We should have a short conversation about this. Because in the wilderness seasons of our lives, in the waiting seasons of our lives, we are prone, of course, to impatience, but perhaps even more so, we're prone to worry. We're prone to worry that it's not all going to work out. We're prone to worry that the result we're expecting is never going to come. We're prone to think in terms of the future and have most of our mindset about what we don't have rather than what we do have. And within this situation in the life and nation of Israel, and I think in our lives, there is this principle. We'll just call it the manna principle. And the principle is, don't worry about tomorrow. God is not in a hurry. And He will give you exactly what you need for today. Wilderness school is not always a pleasant experience for us, but it is one of the places where God does His greatest work. You may notice that this theme of give us what we need for today and help us not get ahead of ourselves is a theme that Jesus picks up in His teaching in the New Testament. I've been really enjoying connecting all this Old Testament stuff to say, yep, and there's an alignment with who Jesus is. But last summer we did a series called The Way of Jesus. We went through the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6. Do you remember this line from what we call the Lord's Prayer? What's Jesus ask us to pray? He says, give us this day our daily bread. He says, there's a way that you all want to construct your lives. You're totally focused on what is to come. And it's true, there are promises that are out there for you. But you get so hung up on what's out there that you miss the work I do day in and day out. I'm asking you to trust me today. And after he offers that simple line within that prayer, he gives a little more commentary on it a little later on. He says, so do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? And then he says this, get this, for the pagans run after these things. Now, pagan in our world is kind of a demoralizing term. If I went out on the street corner and said, you're a pagan, right? Like that wouldn't be received well. But in Jesus' day, pagan just had a very simple definition. It just meant someone who doesn't believe in God. There are people who'd be, I'm a pagan. I don't believe in God, right? And if you don't believe in God, here's what you do. When you don't have anything to eat or anything to drink or anything to wear, you go chase them down yourself. That's what people who don't believe in God do. But people who have a relationship with God, they are free to construct their life in an entirely different way. Which is to say, here's what I know. God will provide for today. And when I wake up tomorrow, He will provide for tomorrow. And the exercise in winding my mind up in knots about what's supposed to happen a month from now, or 3 months from now, or 3 years from now, or 30 years from now will lead you to one place. It will lead you to worry. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow. He actually ends it by saying, because tomorrow has enough trouble of its own. When you're in the wilderness, day by day. Lesson number 3 from wilderness school. God's presence is everything. God's presence is everything. And I don't know about you, but this was pretty convicting to me when I studied through it this week. So follow me on this. The people, again, get very frustrated with God. He doesn't seem to be coming through with what He's promised yet. And in Exodus chapter 17, verse 7, there's a striking phrase after all God has done for them. It says, they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? Unbelievable. Isn't it? I mean, this is the generation that saw God deliver them out of Egypt. This is the generation that with their own eyes had seen the miracle of God, the provision of God, the pathway of God. They'd seen it all. And now they're saying, God, we don't even know if you're with us anymore. God, again, because He's patient with people, with you and with me, He provides for them. And then there's this experience where Moses goes up on the mountaintop of Mount Sinai and receives the 10 Commandments and a covenant from God. During this experience, it's kind of an inspiring experience at first for the people of Israel. there's kind of this sense that, you know what, God is with us all over again. And in Exodus chapter 24, verse 7, there's an image that they're all standing. Remember, there's hundreds of thousands of them. They're all standing in one large assembly. They've been given the book of the covenant, and they're reading from it. And they all stand up, and in one voice, get this, they responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey." God, we got it. We're still in the wilderness. We're not to the promised land yet. You performed this miracle, that miracle, this miracle. You've asked us to do certain things. We got it, relationship. We're going to have some responsibility. We want you to know, God, all of us, we will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey. I love it that this is Exodus 24/7. Right? It's the idea that right now, all the time, every day, 365 days a year, we are with you, right? They numbered that after they said it, okay? That's not... Probably someone did it on purpose. So there's this like pinnacle moment, like finally, this nation of Israel, it's been grumbling and whining and complaining, and are we there yet? That's Exodus 24. I'm going to fast forward 8 chapters. Exodus chapter 32, verse 1, Moses is still on the mountain. At the very moment when Moses is having an encounter with God and God is renewing his covenant with his people and he's giving them their guidance to go forward with, the people have become impatient again. Here's how it goes. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, now remember, Aaron is Moses' brother, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses," you know, what's his name? Moses, "who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." And all of a sudden, they've swung back to be full of doubt. And not only doubt, but at this stage, ready and willing to commit themselves to an entirely different God. And so the story goes that they gather up all the jewelry that they had, they pour it in, they refine it in a fire, and they make this golden calf. It is a physical idol to them that they worship. Now, we should pause here just for a moment to shift the conversation from their experience back to ours. Because one of the very common things that happens when we're in the wilderness, though we have had God faithful to us many, many times before, is that we decide to take things into our own hands, or we decide that if God isn't going to come through for us, we're going to go on our own route. That's exactly what's happening here. God is giving Moses the commands, the responsibilities that this whole nation was supposed to follow through with. And while God is on the mountain giving Moses these commands, the nation is saying, "Forget you." Now, this scene is followed by 2 very dramatic encounters. Moses comes down off the mountain, and the first encounter is with Moses and his brother Aaron. And Moses is hot. He cannot believe that his own brother would give into this. Aaron makes all kinds of excuses, tries to avoid all taking of responsibility, but it is plain to see Aaron has led them somewhere ugly, and Moses is mad. But it's not just Moses who's mad. The next encounter we get is God, and God is mad. Remember, God is a relational God. A lot of you are fathers or mothers. It's certainly not impossible to be very mad at the very people you love. Flabbergasted, perhaps, especially after all you have done for them and their lack of appreciation for it, and they go off on their own way. This isn't God not loving his people, it's him loving them and being exceedingly mad. He's so frustrated with them that he even kind of entertains a conversation with Moses. To say, "Moses, I'm giving up on these people. I've been there for them. Yes, they're waiting right now, but they don't care a lick about me. They want to do their own thing. Let them do their own thing. Why don't you all just go take that promised land? I'll still give you the land. I'm staying here." And in this conversation with Moses, where God essentially says, "Why don't you just go on your own?" Moses looks to God and he says, God, please, no. Please, no. This is how it goes. It says, then Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you're pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us, God? We need your presence. What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? God, you have invested too much. The story is too solid. You made this promise. You got to be with us. And the Lord said to Moses, I will do the very thing you've asked because I'm pleased with you and I know you by name. You know what, Moses? I'm mad. But the relationship is going to hold. And I will be with you. Now, I do not want you to miss what Moses is saying, because what Moses is saying here, I pray, will inspire some of you to the exact same action. Here's what Moses is saying. He's saying, God, we don't want to go there without you. What he's essentially saying is, God, I'd rather be in the wilderness with you. I'd rather be in the desert with you than to have a life of affluence, than to be in the land of milk and honey, to have pure, unadulterated happiness without you. And boy, is this not the defining point for most of our lives. To say, God, your presence with me is more important to me than the things, the stuff, the externals of this world. So given the decision, your presence is everything. God, if this life means poverty for me, if this life means slavery for me, if this life means, but I'm with you, I choose that. I will not walk away from you to chase other things. After this scenario, we get kind of to the end of, if I could fast forward through 40 years. And what happens is, they've decided it's time to go into the promised land. And there's another country that's occupying the promised land that they're going to have to go in and battle to take this land that God has for them. And so they set up kind of a military scenario where Moses chooses 12 spies. And he says, you know what, before we all try to go take that country, I'm going to send you into this country to kind of explore what we're going to run into. Those 12 spies come back and they report to Moses. And 10 of the 12 spies came to the conclusion they couldn't do it. The people in that land were too strong. It was too overwhelming. They were not strong enough. There were 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, who came back and said, no, we have God on our side. We can do this. But get this. This is how the passage goes. But the men who had gone up to him said, this is the 10, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. It's kind of overwhelming, God. And their view of themselves, when they looked in the mirror, was this: we can't do it. Now, this is a total irony, right? Because all along the way, this land was promised to them. It is their land to have. And God has been with them. And they haven't liked the wilderness at all. They wanted to get out of the desert. But when the opportunity comes to move into what is next for them, then there's a different problem. And the problem is, now I'm not sure I want to go there. I'm not sure God is big enough. Eventually they decide that they will go in. You should read this for yourself. Long story underneath that. But before they do, there's one last conversation where the people are asking for water. And Moses is given a command from God to speak to a rock, to give them water, and instead he strikes the rock with his staff. When he does so, water still comes out. God still provides. But in a conversation between God and Moses, after that incident, it goes like this. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy and in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. And at the end of the book of Exodus, God announces to Moses that he won't get to lead the people into the promised land. Now, there are lots of speculation about what God's purpose and reason is underneath this. It seems like a very harsh punishment to Moses after all of his faithfulness to God. Some have speculated, and I agree with this, that there would become a great fear that people were becoming dependent on Moses and not on God. I mean, think about it. They had come out of a culture where, in their Egyptian slavery, Pharaoh was treated as God. And now they had this leader, and it was always at this leader's hands where the miracles of God happened. It's possible that people think, oh, without Moses, we're dead in the water. And God is willing to set aside a single person and to say, hey, you're not going to go. Because the lessons that these people need to learn are more important than any one of us. That their dependence is on me, not on you. And I am with them. Friends, I don't know where you are on your journey tonight. I don't know if some of you feel like you're in the wilderness. But if you are there, I pray that you'll learn the lessons that the wilderness brings to us. To embrace that while you and I are focused on the destination, God wants to do some of his best work of our development. To live by the manna principle. That when you wake up tomorrow, God will provide what you need. In fact, could I encourage you to do this? If you have something specific that you feel like you're waiting on, and there is a tangible object that you could say relates to that, maybe the thing you and I could do this weekend is to go and just write the word manna somewhere on that object as a tangible reminder to us that in the waiting, God provides day by day. And then my prayer is that you would never forget that given the choice to be where you are with God versus where you want to be without him, it's better to be where you are. And God's presence is more important than anything.